number of women with epilepsy themselves. A few housekeeping notes. I should say that we are recording, so just for the use at a later date. Most of you will also be on mute, but we'll have the raise hand function. And there will also be, of course, the opportunity for questions. We very much value your input, and we want to have as much conversation and discussion around these important issues as possible. Just one further point of housekeeping. After the meeting, we'll also be circulating a guest book, which will enable people to voice and write down their hopes for pregnant women with epilepsy for the future. And the idea is we will eventually present that to government. So again, we very much value your thoughts on that as well. For example, the Epilepsy Society will be saying that we hope that no woman should have to choose between a drug that controls her seizures and one that safeguards her baby. So they're the basic housekeeping rules. And without further ado, I'll pass on to Claire Pelham, who is our CEO. Claire.
Thank you very much, Nathan, and lovely to see everybody on the screen and to have a really good insight into your sitting rooms. And I apologise for my slightly messy backdrop, but it's a working environment, even though it's my home. So I would just like, by way of introduction, to say briefly a few words about the history, which has led us to mount the campaign that we're mounting today, Safe Mum, Safe Baby, and then to talk a little bit about the campaign and the difference that it might make, and most importantly, to talk about what we'd like to see change as a result of us all getting together. So I know that there are many experts on this screen and outside this screen, experts most importantly by experience, but also politicians, journalists, scientists, doctors, all of whom have huge expertise and very valuable time. And we wouldn't be asking for your time if we didn't want to get something to change as a result of it. So thank you for giving it to us, and let's hope that we can sometime soon in the future get together and celebrate the difference that we've made. So to say a few words about the history. So if I can start by saying us here today are standing on the shoulders of giants, because there's a long and honourable tradition of campaigning to support women's health. To start with a personal note, and it was very much part of my childhood when I was growing up. My mother was one of the women who was offered thalidomide when she was pregnant. And that's a very personal and resonant experience for those of us who've been involved in this field, and trying to prioritise the medical and health needs of pregnant women. Much more recently, we've had the scandal of sodium valproate. And I want to say something a little bit risky here, because I said that we're standing on the shoulders of giants. And I'd like to say this is in no way a sizist comment if I say that two of the giants are with us. We've got some really redoubtable campaigners here in Emma and Janet who have moved mountains to bring sodium valproate to the attention of the public and the politicians. And that led directly to the Cumberledge inquiry, and which heard such moving evidence about the need to prioritise women's health. So, you know, we couldn't have a gathering of this kind without celebrating all that you have achieved and all the people who've helped you to get there. And of course, there's still more to do on that. But it sometimes seems that we climb one mountain to find a larger one in front of us. And we have recently had, at the beginning of the year, the publication of the Commission on Human Medicines report. Now, in the way of government reports, it's got a really catchy title. It's called Optimizing Data on Medicines Used During Pregnancy. I mean, it's going to be a real bestseller with that sort of title. But what it says essentially is that it is still unsafe for pregnant women with epilepsy to take some drugs while they're pregnant. Not all drugs, and that's important to say, but some drugs. And can I say now, as we say on every single occasion, that if any woman with epilepsy has any concerns, she should always continue taking her medication and not make any changes without consulting her doctor. That can't be said often enough. But that report by the Commission on Human Medicines is what's led us to mount our campaign. Because what struck us is that it's all very well and great, and I don't in any way, I mean, I celebrate the fact that the government's intending to have the first ever women's health strategy. That's amazing and great, and if I may say so, about bloody time, but it's really fantastic. But it will be meaningless if the money doesn't follow the strategy. It really will. And I'm not one at all in any sense to lightly ask for government expenditure. And we're not actually asking today for more money. What we're asking for is a fair share of the pot of money that was recently announced in the Queen's speech for research funding. I mean, I'm simply delighted to hear that the government is prioritising money for the life sciences. That is amazing and hugely welcome. But isn't it about time that women and babies got their share of it? I mean, and not maybe even a bit more than their share of it. We're a real priority so that we can have research properly funded that will make a real difference to women's lives. And I know that we're going to hear from women who would be directly affected if we were able to make the progress that we hope to make, so that we're not relying on only drugs that were developed in the last century when we move into the next century. So I'll stop there, Nathan, because I think it's important that we hear from the people who have the personal experience to tell.
Very much, Claire. So yes, indeed, we now have Yasmin Golding. Yasmin is a young woman with epilepsy from South East London, and very pleased to see that her constituency MP is here as well to support her, Abena Osaro upon. So thank you very much, Yasmin.
I'd just like to thank her myself as well. I'm really glad to hear that you're actually on board with this. So yeah, I'm Yasmin, 26, had epilepsy since I was 11 years old, and one of the maybe different things for myself is my seizures are not fully controlled, even though I take multiple medications. So for myself, it's a very fine balance of life, sometimes just knowing I'm overdue a seizure, things like that. But I have tried every drug in the book. I know my doctor once said to me that every neurologist probably has once been asked a question about what to do with my case. I've had surgery 5 times, brain surgery, including stereo EEG, but that's not the point of today. Basically, I'm a woman with epilepsy who would be affected by my medication, primarily because I take phenytoin, which is one of the medications that was highlighted in this report and was one that was made nearly a century ago. I want to be able to have my own family, despite what I just said, and I don't think that's too much to ask for. And yesterday on an interview, I was asked about maybe I should just consider alternatives. And I think, well, maybe was my answer. I didn't really know what to say then. But alternatives should only be alternatives as a temporary measure. And they're only going to be a temporary measure if there's progress being made. And I really don't feel like there's progress being made. So I've tried everything. We're not going forward. Where's the hope? And how can we have hope for other people? Because women give birth to the future as well. You've got to think about that. And like for myself, you could say, okay, we'll try and go on to a slightly safer medication, but that takes a lot, as in, you know, I've got to wean off my current one. We've got to try another one in hopes that it works, but it may not. So then I've got to give up time, my life. It also impacts work. It could impact my mental health because I'm having more seizures. There are so many more implications of this that I think is more than just the medication itself. And if I was to ever go through pregnancy, I fear the psychological stress that would come with it, because I will have to be on more than one medication, I believe, because I never haven't been. And therefore it's a double-edged sword. So how can I have hope going forward? I either have to sacrifice my life now and go through the same trials of trying to find medication that works, which we have done for the last 15 years and ultimately got nowhere considering what I ended up on. But then I don't have time for that, and maybe that's what I need to sacrifice, but it's a lot to sacrifice. And I think maybe that's the point I'd like to make, that it's not easy just to jump onto something safe and hope it works. Sometimes they don't work. Making that change takes time, and therefore it takes a lot more out of your life. And overall I feel the drugs, the stress, would take the joy out of pregnancy and having a child. And the fear, also the other point I'd like to make is I would be terrified to have to parent a child with extra needs, and that is because I have to manage my own condition, which is very hard. So and knowing how much extra work I was for my own mother and father, having a child with extra needs, I just think I couldn't do it. And the fact that these are avoidable, it's just not right. I don't know if there's any other questions, or I'm probably going to think of things to say later.
Yasmin, thank you very, very much. Thank you for sharing your story there. Really appreciate that. It's great to see that we have so many attendees in the room now with questions to ask. I think firstly we are going to go to Professor Sanjay Sisodiya, who is going to give the scientific background to this, to the next steps, and then we're going to have the opportunity for questions. So it'd be great to get as much input as possible from you after Professor Sanjay has spoken. Sanjay.
Thank you very much, Nathan, and thank you, Yasmin. I think you have so movingly described the problems that you're facing, and I think you've said exactly what it is that we need to do, which is to look into this in more detail, to try and find out what's going on, so that maybe there is some hope ahead. I guess it's difficult to do anything these days without reference to the other serious issue that we're facing, which is the pandemic. And even today, we can't escape the sweep of the pandemic, because if it hadn't been for the pandemic, we would all met maybe face to face. But we are seeing things that are improving. We're seeing restrictions being lifted, and we're seeing more freedoms becoming possible. And the reasons that this is happening is because of the science. We're moving ahead for two reasons: the social measures and the vaccinations. And both of these steps have come from the science and a developing understanding of how the virus works, and so how we can deal with it. It's a science really that's taking us ahead, allowing us to act as rationally as possible in the short time that we have had to actually do something. So there are some parallels here between the pandemic and the issues we're discussing today. They're not the same, of course, but there are some important lessons, I think, from the pandemic. We know that the effects can be devastating, as Yasmin has told us just now. And we know the problem is widespread. And we can see that there's a real dilemma here, in that we don't have a perfect drug. We don't have a drug that's safe and effective in all circumstances. We don't have a set of these drugs. And I think, as I say, Yasmin really, I think, identified those problems very well. We do know more now than we did before. We know more about the size of the problem, for example, through the work of the MHRA and the CHM and other bodies. And we know that already prescription practices are changing. And this altogether has led to important steps. For example, the regulations around the use of valproate, the risk acknowledgement form, the PREVENT program, and guidance for all healthcare professionals. And we're not there yet with all of these steps that are important, that we are all taking. There are some issues still to be dealt with, and there's still action happening across many of those fronts. What we're doing, of course, is to try and use an understanding of the scope of the issue to help. We're trying to avoid exposure where we can, and we're using other measures where that's more difficult. But there is a key element here that's missing. And what's missing is knowing what the problem is, knowing how these drugs actually cause the problems. We don't know that. We don't know why some drugs cause more problems than other drugs. We don't know why some drugs seem to cause problems in some women and not other women. We don't know what the fundamental mechanisms here are. So what we're using are workarounds, if you like. We're trying to avoid exposures, we're trying to do other things, but we don't understand what the problem is. So the science in the middle of this problem is missing, as it was, if you like, at the start of the pandemic. What causes the neurodevelopmental disorders? What causes the malformations? This is what we really need to address. Now, one possibility is that the problems relate to our genes. For example, many diseases we know can be caused by changes in our genes, the individual genetic makeup that we all carry around, and the genetics of the three people involved here, the parents and the child. So these may be contributing to the problems, and that's because we know that genetic changes are often responsible for neurodevelopmental disorders and for malformations. So it makes sense to think about genes as one way to address this problem. And of course, not just genes, but also the way that genes are regulated. If you think about genes as the laws, then the way they're regulated, what we call epigenetics, if you like, is like the interpretation of the laws. So these are two important areas that we should be thinking about: the way that genes themselves work and the way that genes are regulated and how drugs interact with them. This is likely to be really complicated. But again, we know that the pandemic virus is complicated and the way that it interacts with the human body is complicated. And of course, it was a new challenge for humans. Humans hadn't been exposed to this virus. So it was a challenge for us as individuals. And it was also a challenge for the NHS and a challenge for science. And in some ways, of course, anti-epileptic drugs are like this because humans haven't evolved with anti-epileptic drugs. So we don't have mechanisms to deal with them, which is why sometimes they can cause problems. Now, of course, it might not just be genetics, but genetics, I think, are likely to be important because we know of the role of genetics in other neurodevelopmental and malformation disorders. And because we can actually address genetics, we can tackle the problems associated with genes, as we've seen with the virus. We've sequenced the virus. We know about the various variants of the virus, the Kent variant, the India variant. This has all come about through an understanding of the science and in particular of the genetics. So there has been some work done in this area already. So for example, there was a project called EpiPGX, which was funded by the EU some years ago. And in that project, we collected DNA from women who had epilepsy and who had pregnancies while they were on anti-epileptic drugs. This was a challenge. It was a difficult thing to do, even when some of the women who had had these problems had been under our care and we had known them well. It was quite a challenge to do this whole process, to go through explaining this and explaining why it was important to do this. And in the end, we actually got over about 100 people taking part in that aspect of the project, even though overall we had 10,000 people taking part. So it is a challenge to do this. But we did find things from this. We found, for example, that the drugs themselves don't seem directly to cause genetic changes. This is an important thing to understand. There must be something going on, but it's not that the drugs themselves are directly damaging the genes, causing new mutations in the child that might be responsible for the problems that we're seeing. This was a small study, and there have been lots of other small studies. Lots of people have done a number of studies in this field, but they've all been small and they've been not replicated, and so we don't really still know what the underlying mechanisms are. We still don't understand what the scientific basis for these problems might be. But we are in a position to take this forward. And it's really, I think, one of the fantastic things that we have here, of course, in the UK is the NHS. We've seen how the NHS, of course, did fantastic work through the pandemic, not only coping with all the numbers of people who had COVID and were seriously ill with it, but at the same time undertaking science and research, which, for example, led to new drugs becoming available, proven to be effective in the treatment of the problems associated with the virus. So the NHS, I think, allows us to undertake large-scale studies for important problems. And here is another important problem that through the NHS we could begin to address. We know there are about 2,500 women with epilepsy who have pregnancies each year. And some of these women we will be able to collect information from through the registry, for example, that the MHRA are developing. If we could extend that, if we could extend the registry to ensure that all women with epilepsy who are going through a pregnancy or thinking about pregnancy and maybe on anti-epileptic drugs, if they can all be included, and if that can be tied in with appropriate research, with all the permissions, of course, and all the consents, but if they can be tied in together, then we stand a chance of really producing sufficient data to be able to understand the problem and tackle it properly. We could go over a few years, for example, collect samples and information from something like 10,000 women with epilepsy, and that would give us a real chance, I think, to address the science at the heart of this problem. So I think that's what we really need to do. And we're in a good phase to do this, I think, because there's growing appreciation of these problems. There's the momentum behind all the work that's being done now. There's a lot of support for science, as we see emerging from how successful science has been in helping us through the pandemic. So I think this is a really good time to try and support this work and understand what the basic mechanisms are behind these problems so that we can really tackle them and hopefully offer hope for women like Yasmin and others in her position. Thank you, Nathan.
Thank you so much, Sanjay, for that. So now we have the opportunity for some questions. I know that a few people have to leave a little bit early, so do let us know if you have a question either for Sanjay or for Claire, or of course for Yasmin as well. So do feel free to raise the hand function. Emma Murphy.
Yeah, hi everyone. Claire, thank you for this opportunity. I was really touched there by Yasmin's comment and experience, and it's just to reach out to you really to say that I'm tearing up a bit. You stated that you couldn't raise a child with disabilities. As me and Janet know, any child born to sodium valproate or the other AEDs taken during pregnancy, we never envisaged this would happen to us. And believe me, life can be very difficult, particularly when you're dealing with multiple disabilities. And let's not forget that these children are born with autism, but there are other disabilities. But on the flip side of that, it is devastating. But our children are our children, and we love them regardless. And I just want to offer you a bit of hope that it's not an ideal situation. It's devastating. And believe me, 9 years of campaigning, the actual ignorance around this topic is a huge problem. But I just want to offer you hope that when and eventually you do get pregnant, you will love your child so very hard. I was so touched by what you said, and I want to also thank all the supporting MPs and people like Sanjay who have supported this topic, because it's a topic that we've discovered for 9 years now. It has been ignored. There's an element, it has been swept under the carpet, and I don't say that lightly, and I don't want to say that, but it's a very controversial topic, because women are in a no-win situation. We need these medicines to live, to survive, and we welcome all the work and all the progress and collaboration with this. But for you, Yasmin, and other women out there, to just offer that bit of hope that pregnancy and motherhood, despite its challenges, is really amazing.
Thank you very much, Emma. Did we have a question from Abina?
Hi, yes. My name's Abna Pongasari. I'm the MP for Erefton-Thames-Mead. I just wanted to say that, Yasmin, your story really touched me. I know it wouldn't have been easy to share your story with all of us, but it's really important that we do hear from people like you. If I'm going to be completely honest, this isn't an area that I know very well, so it's good to hear from experts like Sanjay, and also from various campaigners and the organisation about the work that you have been doing. I've seen that you've been doing quite substantial work over years about it. And obviously I'm particularly concerned because obviously during the pandemic, the main thing has been the focus on the recovery in terms of COVID, the impact it's had on people. And so issues like this may have fallen down the radar, particularly as we know that health professionals and GPs are massively overworked. One of the things that I wanted to ask really is, and also particularly for Yasmin, very keen to support you in any way that you need. I don't know if there's any support groups out there that have been able to provide support to you, but also conversations that have been had at a national level with the government minister on this. Very happy to make representations. I'm here to kind of support you and speak on your behalf. So if there's any specific asks that you would like us to take forward in terms of raising this, and I'm sure a number of my parliamentary colleagues here on the call would want to do the same as well. Very much happy to do that. I've seen the asks in terms of what you want, in terms of taking it forward, particularly recognising the drug impacts it has on people. Whereas if there's anything specific urgently that you would like me to do, particularly as your local MP, very happy to do that. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. I see we have a few further questions. Shall we have Kat Smith and then Olivia Blake as well? So Kat Smith.
Thanks, Nathan. I just wanted to respond really to a few things. First of all, I thought Emma, who I know really well, and I met Emma when I was first elected as an MP. I'm not her MP, but she came with my constituent Janet, who's also on the call, and I knew nothing about the impact of anti-epileptic drugs on pregnancy. I just assumed, and I think a lot of MPs, particularly like if you've not come across this, you just assume that if you have drugs that you are prescribed in pregnancy, that they will be safe. And I knew about historic things around like thalidomide, and I just thought it was something that was designed to the history books. So for me, 6 years ago when I got elected as an MP, it came as a massive shock. And so Yasmin, I just want to give you a bit of hope and just say, look, I have a health condition that I take medication for, and my little boy was born with a minor impairment because of the drugs I took when I was pregnant, which I needed to take in order to be okay myself. And yeah, it is difficult, and it does come with a level of guilt that it shouldn't do, but be kind to yourself and recognise the fact that you need to be okay too. And I just want to give you some hope. And you know what, I'm a single parent now, and obviously I have my health condition, which on one occasion has caused me to black out, pass out when I've been alone with my son. And you know what, he's 2, and he just cuddled in next to me and waited for me to come round. And that can be quite difficult, but it doesn't make me a bad mum. And I just want to say that it will be okay. It might not be the fairy tale dream that you might think it is, but I don't think it is for anyone. So I just wanted to give you hope. And then I suppose really as chair of the all-party group on sodium valproate and other anti-epileptic drugs in pregnancy, my question is about what's the ask from you about what we can do as MP? What more can we do to raise the profile, but also sort of politically, is there any sort of specific asks that we can take up as well? I think that's from me.
So Claire, perhaps do you want to touch on some key asks initially, and then we can hear from Yasmin as well?
Thank you. Yes. So and we might come back to this further in conversation. We have 2 very specific requests, and we'd be really grateful for your help in using your social media and other networks to gain support for these. So firstly, we have a petition that we would like to get as many signatories for as possible, and we'll send you the links to that. But secondly, really, and it's the direct answer to Yasmin's question, where is the hope? So the hope is in research. And we've seen, as Sanjay said during the pandemic, that when research is well enough funded, it can get quick results. So we're not looking to make every medicine safe. What we're looking for and hoping for and believe is achievable is to be able to arrive at medicines that are safe for the individual woman in question, so that she doesn't have to choose that awful, invidious choice that Yasmin talked about. Do I take the medication that's right for me and forego the chance to have a family, or do I take the risk and live with the possibility that I may have a child with disabilities that would have been preventable if I hadn't taken my medication? So those are our two very specific asks.
Thank you, Claire. And Yasmin, you wanted to raise a point as well?
Well, in response to those talks, all of you, I'm really touched. I think I mean, I'm not saying I think I'm touched, I am. I'm just thinking now. I know that if I do, whatever happens, if I have a child, I will love that child. It's just the fear of how I will do that. But you know, it's always reassuring just to hear from people who've gone through something similar. So thank you, Emma. You know, it's great. And Abina, I think I'm trying to think of specific asks, but very much what Claire said for the requests, Abina. And I think I would like to speak. One of the things you said was that you didn't understand. Obviously, this is very new to you, and I think maybe an opportunity to learn more and find more, because if to get representation, you do it, you'll be able to do your best job through a greater understanding. And whether that would be either talking to myself or someone from the Epilepsy Society, I think that would be a really good meeting to be had. I did have a quick question for Dr. Sanjay, because I was just, you said about we don't understand how the medicines affect babies and mothers. I was wondering if there's been sort of just comparative studies in like maybe the biochemistry of medications, because on the report, what was it? Lactamol and Keppra were ones that were sort of mentioned as safer, or they are more modern, sorry. And whereas things like valproate, Veneto and everything are very old. So I was wondering if there's ever been studies just to compare those drugs and how they work. And also, while there were no genetic changes, did you study epigenetics in that, which you mentioned earlier in your speech, your speaking time?
Sure, yes. So the second question first. We are currently looking at the epigenetics, but I think we have to be realistic in that the results we get are going to be limited, because the number of pregnancies and the number of women who were in the study was small. And that's really given us, I think, a direction, because it tells us that in order to get answers, we need to include more women and have the resources to study more women who are going through these problems. So we did, but I don't think that we'll have definitive answers. But I do think it's important to look at. And your first point about the different drugs, I think it's a really important point you make. The older drugs tend to be the ones that are more troublesome, but some of the newer drugs could also be, and of course, you know, they've not been around for as long, so we might not have as much information for them. And I think you make an important point. If we can understand the differences between these different drugs, then maybe we can understand what might be a better way to go in trying to use the drugs more safely, or even provide directions for the development of new drugs that are safer. So I think it's a really important point that you bring out. And it's only by getting enough information about these different drugs that we can really answer that question.
Thank you, Sanjay. I think we should now hear from Olivia Blake, MP, and then we are going to hear from her constituent, Lauren Sutton, who is also going to give her perspective as a woman with epilepsy. I see you're masquerading as Tom Keegan today. So Olivia Blake first.
Oh, well, I just wanted to ask a couple of questions, if that's okay. This is something that's quite struck quite a chord with me, because I've got several disabilities, and I take a large number of medication each and every day, and I think I have to stop 3 of them 3 months before I even consider trying to get pregnant. So I recognise the lack of research into safe medications for women who are pregnant for a whole host of different issues, but obviously epilepsy is just such an important one to keep that control. So I fully appreciate the story that Yasmin you've just shared with us, because I think it's so important. So I just wanted to ask what more we could do to pursue more research funding and raise awareness of this around epilepsy, but also kind of what I've also got a science background in biomedical science, so I always take quite a lot of interest in the research. So I just wanted to know if there's kind of any international kind of research that you're kind of working with, Sanjay, or if it's now we've left the European Union, if that's a bit more difficult. Yeah, just get that kind of international picture, if that's okay.
Nathan, do you want me to take the second part of this question?
Absolutely, Sanjay, yes, please.
Yeah, so in terms of collaboration, almost everything that we do is collaborative, and leaving the European Union isn't stopping us doing that. The studies that we've done so far have all been collaborative, because you can't do this sort of science I certainly couldn't do it by myself, for example. I don't have the expertise myself to do all of this, all the different things that are needed. So both in terms of expertise, skills, but also in terms of trying to get answers that are robust by making sure that you've studied enough people, you need to do this internationally. And we will do everything that we do pretty much is collaborative international with Europe, Australia, the States, Canada. We're working with all of them.
Shall I just move on to the question of funding, Nathan?
Absolutely, Claire, yes.
So everybody from the Epilepsy Society who's on this call, when they're not on calls like this, spends at least half a day, if not 3/4 of their day, doing things like raffles, sponsored walks, shaking a tin, you name it, we're out there fundraising. And that is great. And the generosity of the British public is fabulous. And, you know, we are so grateful for everything that we receive. And using that money, we've been able to build the research centre that we have on site at Chalfont. And in partnership with UCL, we have the world's leading research centre in this area. But if we carry on as we are, things will take forever to change. What we really need is a slice of that money that the government has just announced for life sciences, so that we can make the step change for the 300,000 women with epilepsy in this country that will be life-changing for them. And I mean, that should be enough for anyone, I would think. But actually, there's more to it than that, because as we build up British science, so we become a world leader in this field, and many other good things happen too. But that's why we're here, and that's why we're trying to make a difference, all of us. We're just sick and tired of going at snail's pace when we could go so much faster with more government money.
I think just to add to what Claire has said there, in terms of day-to-day steps, we're always appreciative for parliamentary questions, for example, early day motion, and of course, as we say, promoting this petition more broadly as well. In terms of next steps, I'll be sure to send an email to all MPs afterwards, explaining various options that we would greatly appreciate, including a link to the petition and potential parliamentary questions in terms of wording as well. We are now going to hear from Caroline Noakes, who has a point, and then we're going to hear from our second woman with epilepsy who's here today, Lauren Sutton from Sheffield. Caroline.
Thanks for that, Nathan. And it was specifically picking up on the point you were making about parliamentary questions. So at this point, full credit to Emma and Janet, who I have to say I can only describe as relentless in drafting questions for me, which I diligently submit, and I think wait to get a decent answer to any of them. I don't think we've been satisfied with a single one, but it really is evidence of how you can use your MPs to just keep the pressure on the Department of Health and Social Care. And I can say, as a former minister, when you start to get a pattern of questions coming in again and again and again, eventually it pushes you to the point where it is easier to act than to keep trying to fend an issue off. So I think it's a tactic well worth deploying.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that, Caroline. Let's now hear from Lauren Sutton. Lauren lives in Totley in Sheffield, and very interested in hearing your perspective, Lauren.
Hello, thanks for having me. So I've had epilepsy, idiopathic generalized epilepsy, since I was 14 years old. I'm now 33, so I'm a little bit further ahead than Yasmin and Laura. So my seizures are tonic-clonic. So if you don't know what that is, it's grand mal seizures, so I fall to the floor, quite dramatic, Holby City casualty style. Sometimes this goes into status epilepticus. So that will mean I can have seizures one after the other, after another, and I don't come up for breath. And it can be, well, I could die. That's the crux of it. So I need someone with me really all the time. So I've generally got my partner with me. If he can't be there, I'll be with my family. So my epilepsy isn't just, oh, she's just got epilepsy. It really is something that is there, back of my mind, every second of the day, even when I'm sat here now. Even last night when I was sleeping, I was thinking, gosh, am I going to be okay for this meeting? Gosh, try not to be too anxious. I was having my dreams and I was dreaming about having seizures. It's, it really is there. And I know for the girls that are speaking, it is there with them as well. So when it's just been said that us having to hammer questions all the time, you have to also think, we've got this all the time. We shouldn't have to keep hammering questions. If we ask a question, it's taken a lot for us to say something. It would be nice if we were just listened to, and then people did their job and went forward with that. So moving on. Yeah, thanks Emma. I know what you've had to do a lot. So my medication at the moment is lamotrigine, zonisamide, oxcarbazepine. It was before also clobazam, but I was told that really it's not safe when trying for pregnancy. I've also been on Keppra, but it made me a huge angry monster, depression and everything else that comes along with it. I've also had perampanel, but I was just having seizure after seizure after seizure, which seemed to be counterproductive. And I've tried all sorts of things, just as Yasmin was saying. So again, we have to get this balance, but I don't feel there's enough medications on the market that are safe or are necessarily controlling what needs to be controlled. So when you go into family planning, I've always been advised to try sort of 18 months of titrating, really planning what you're going to do beforehand. This is even before you think about conceiving. So titrating on and off medications. This led for me to have to leave work. So I'll be an unemployed mother if I get to that stage. So that's fantastic. And this is, workplaces aren't geared up for you to say, okay, I've got to come off medication, but it's not that I've stopped paracetamol. It's that I've actually had to stop medications. I can't cross the street because I can't judge how cars are moving. I can't get up properly in the mornings. I'm completely drowsy. I don't know what's going on. I can't form sentences. It really, changes everything about you. I became a dangerous version of myself. So it took about 10 months to a year to actually find the right levels of medications. We thought I should be off one, but actually, no, I really needed that one. We thought I should go on to another. So I got to say a year. We thought I was stable enough. Obviously, we have to increase the folic acid levels. So far, I've had 3 miscarriages. Right, okay. is that linked to my medication? Or is that just me? Oh, well, Lauren, people don't really talk about miscarriages, so we're not really sure. It's a taboo. Just carry on trying. That's the fun side. Not really. It's not really that fun when every time I go to the bathroom, I'm checking for bloods. Every time I have a pain, oh, is that again? It's not fun when you can't connect to that next unborn child because you think the next time we go to the bathroom, is it going to be gone? Someone needs to talk to you and say, actually, yes, it might be to do with medication. Perhaps we should slow down again. Perhaps we should see if we should come off this, or actually, no, it's just unfortunate. And yes, your body knows that this one wasn't the right time. I'm quite scientific with these things, so I just tell myself, yeah, it wasn't the right time, you'll be okay. But again, as Sanjay said, you're in a pandemic, no one's there to talk to you face to face. I'm doing everything on a phone. So yeah, it's just, and another thing needs to be that if there are safe medications and there is more research into the ones that we're on, at least we've got an idea if it is linked to these. So my friends were having their children in their 20s. I'm trained as a primary teacher. I know that I can look after a class of 30 children, but I've not felt that I was safe enough to look after my own child. So when everyone else is going through having their children that are now 10 or more, I had to hold off. And, you know, it was all, well, aren't you going to have your children? Why aren't we all not having our kids together? Why are they not best friends like we're best friends? You know, you have to make these choices. And it didn't seem very fair because it's not my epilepsy that causes problems. It's the anti-epileptic drugs. Yasmin was faced with the question yesterday, well, should you not make that choice because of your epilepsy? No, that's not her epilepsy that's doing that. That's lack of funding, lack of research, lack of care for years. They say, you know, if it was a male's problem, lots of these issues that we have, then things will get changed. Quite possibly, because they say, well, if the husband or partner is taking anti-epileptic medication, you don't need to worry because it won't be passed on from him to the baby. It's just if the woman's doing it. Well, just the woman does quite a lot. When just the woman has the baby, she'll look after it just as well as the man. So we need to do something about it. I'm sure I've got more to say on this part, but I'm going to move on. So even people that are closely affected and, you know, work closely with me, friends, family, they're affected with the stigma of epilepsy. So they've said terrible things to me over the years and not even realised. So, you know, I've had ex-partners' mums say, you can't have children with her because I don't want my grandchildren having epilepsy. That sticks to you. The nice things don't stick to you. So funnily enough, that's why they say it's exes, because they didn't stand up to her. Are you still thinking of having children at your age? I was only in my 30s. Even with your epilepsy and your medications, is that fair on them? That was my best friend, and she's a midwife. And you think, she knows me, she knows my epilepsy, and she understands medications and babies. Gosh, was she right? But she's also got 2 children that she's happily sharing on Insta, that she knows I've been there to see growing up. So it's not fair. So every neurologist, epileptologist, and GP, they don't all know all the issues related around family planning and the AEDs. And that's why we get into these muddles with things like sodium valproate and the other medications that go on. Not everyone is as well informed. There isn't the guidance there. So we need to get this funding. We need to have better treatments. We need to have better guidelines. You need to be able to pick up a packet as if you have a headache and you have paracetamol, you know the consequence. I want to pick up my packets and know whether or not I should be taking this medication and be able to say to my consultant, yes, I'm going to go on this because of this. Actually, no, I'm not because of this. Mm-hmm. I've been fighting this personal battle for 19 years, nearly 20. It'd be great to finally see a change happen from the top so that I feel supported by the government and researchers to feel like my health matters and the future of my family's health really matters. And just one more thing is that there's children living with preventable disabilities that's not due to their mother's epilepsy, but their AEDs. When will mothers stop being forced to play Russian roulette with the health of their unborn children?
Lauren, thank you so much for sharing your story there. I think one thing that immediately springs to mind is we have your MP here, Olivia Blake, who I'm sure will be very happy to further this conversation in terms of any active steps going forward as well in Parliament. I see that we are running a little short on time, and there are a few stages I'd like to get to. So perhaps the first thing I'd say is if anybody has to leave at 10 o'clock on the dot, if they would like to ask a question just before they go, let me know. Otherwise, we can go on to Sarah Mee, who is the Senior Medical Assessor at the MHRA, and she's going to give a perspective from the regulator's point of view. And we're then going to hear a message from Trudy Harrison MP, who couldn't make it, and then we'll finish with some Q&A. I appreciate we're coming towards the end, but hopefully we can squeeze some additional questions in as well. So, Sarah.
Thank you, Nathan. Thank you for inviting me to your meeting today and for sharing all the stories and information, everyone. Very, very moving and a real call to action. So I was asked to update on the most recent work of the MHRA to get a better understanding into the benefits and risks of these drugs that are used to treat epilepsy. As people on the call will be aware, the results of a review of the relative risks of the other anti-epileptics in addition to valproate was completed and communicated in January this year. And a patient safety leaflet that went across the class of medications was published. There was a public assessment report, a press release, social media, and updates to the NICE and Pan College guidance documents, the SPC and the PIL. And the review was recommended by the Commission on Human Medicines to help support these really difficult switching decisions. We are part, as the UK, of an EU study underway to provide further evidence for best practice in switching. That's using our UK CPRD database and also a French healthcare database. We've had the first report from the valproate registry, and as people on the call will know, the results, we published that in February this year, and we're undertaking work to extend that. It will include all other anti-epileptics and the devolved administrations. And central to this work is the digitalisation of the acknowledgement of risk form. In the future, it's planned that we're going to have a patient-facing site of the registry so that women themselves will be able to enter their own data. There's been a publication of the Future of Health and Social Care white paper. Within this, there are measures to enable us as regulators to establish and maintain medicines registries across the board, very much hoping this will place registries like valproate extended to the other anti-epileptics on a statutory footing. And the core of these registries is routinely collected data, but we're also seeking delegated powers to extend that within bespoke data collections from other systems. We've been engaged in undertaking work to look at wider teratogen exposure risk management and how terms of engagement with the Patient Safety Commissioner once they're appointed. We're continuing our work with the valproate stakeholder network, of which several members on the call participate very actively in, and the valproate safety implementation group of NHS England and Improvement. We're involved in ongoing research into all of the other risks that are currently unknown, such as the paternal risk transmission, the transgenerational risks. Sanjay talked about the epigenetic studies. We're very involved in the European studies despite Brexit, and the transgenerational studies, and there's a registry study ongoing to better characterise fetal valproate spectrum disorder. We've taken very seriously the latest report from the confidential inquiry into maternal deaths and discussed that at 2 expert groups this last quarter, and we've got several recommendations we're taking forward with the manufacturers. We've had reports from the Behavioural Insights team and taking forward some actions there to try to improve patient communications. And we will just continue to work with the groups that we're engaged with to be reactive to however we can help further with the ongoing work. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Sarah. I think what we will do, we'll hear from Janine Winterbottom, who I know has been waiting for quite a while. I think then we will hear from Trudy Harrison MP, and then we may have to wrap up with some closing comments from Claire. As I say, there will be the guest book, so there'll be the opportunity to raise any further thoughts that you have there that we'll share with you afterwards. Janine and then Nicola as well.
So yeah, thank you for the time today, and thank you so much for those experiences shared by Lauren and Yasmin particularly, and also Emma, and I know Janet also would share her experiences, I'm sure, if having the opportunity. I think what's clear is that we need the science to be able to support the work we do as clinicians. And I'm here both as a researcher and as a clinician. So I work as an epilepsy nurse specialist, and I'm also involved in research to try and develop how services are offered to women in that preconception and the pregnancy planning stage. And as Lauren shared so eloquently and movingly, there are balances to be made, and women should be able to enjoy a pregnancy. And I think in that preparation stage, we do need to be able to feel confident that those preparations are then in a supportive way. And so we use these words of preconception care and counselling. And counselling sometimes implies that there's more than maybe delivered. And my point really is that the research is there for science, but it also needs to be there for the healthcare delivery. There are such variations on how women get supported across the UK, and from the Medicines Authority through to government, we need to address how every woman with epilepsy should be able to have a consultation. We know from the MHRA for their work on the valproate that even with those regulatory powers, not all women are having that annual review. And so we are aware that even at that level of regulation, we are not getting those messages across to women. And there's no regulation of what quality that support is. So women can be given really poor advice and negative statements. And whether it's from somebody who is a friend or a neighbour or an acquaintance giving some off-the-cuff remark of a woman having a choice between having a baby or not, as health professionals, we need to be able to give that evidence of information, but we need to be able to give it in a supportive way. So my point really is that the funding needs to be wider than just the science. We need to make the science then work in practice. And that's obviously some of the work that I'm involved in. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Janine. Nicola, if you could read out the statement and then we'll wrap up with Claire, if that's okay.
Thank you. Yes. So this is a statement from Trudy Harrison, MP for Copeland. And she was hoping to be here to support her constituent, Laura Moore, who is another of the women with epilepsy who was going to talk about the challenges she faces. Unfortunately, Laura hasn't been able to join us today because she's not well. But Trudy did send us this statement. As a mother of 4, I know all about both the joy and anxiety associated with pregnancy. Having a baby is one of the most exciting times in a woman's life, but it can also be worrying. Pregnancy can be a time of great stress and anxiety as you hope for the birth of a healthy child. For women like my constituent, Laura Moore, these concerns are multiplied many times over. Laura has epilepsy and hopes one day to have a family, but is worried about the effects her medication could have on any future children. She has said, I know I want to have a family one day and don't want to put my future children at risk. Pregnancy is a big stress for any woman, but when you have to worry about your medication as well, it makes it that much worse. As many of you will know, a report from the Commission on Human Medicines has shown that many of the most commonly prescribed epilepsy drugs can cause an increased risk of physical and neurodevelopmental harm to babies when taken during pregnancy. I can only begin to imagine the anxiety this must cause to women with epilepsy, such as Laura. I'm pleased to hear that Laura will be speaking at the Safe Mum, Safe Baby Roundtable alongside other women with epilepsy. These are issues that need to be raised, and I thank the Epilepsy Society for doing just that. I'm sorry I could not attend, but the campaign for safer medicines for pregnant women with epilepsy has my full backing. Safer medicines research is very important work, and it is imperative that alternative drugs or treatments are found so that women like Laura can have the opportunity to start and raise a family without having to worry. No woman should be forced to choose between controlling their seizures and having a child. I hope that this is not a choice women will have to make in the near future.
Thank you. Claire.
Thank you, Nathan. So lovely to hear that statement from Trudy, but quite honestly, hope is not enough. It's not enough to hope for change. Change will happen. This is what we've learned, all of us who had any involvement in this field, that, you know, we need to make this change happen. There are 300,000 women with epilepsy in the UK, and I don't want any of them ever to have to face the question that Yasmin faced yesterday. You know, why don't you just consider not having a family? That's not fair and not right, and it's not okay. And we're going to do everything we can to make sure that we get the funding to make that question irrelevant in the future. So we'd be really grateful for your help, because in the coming weeks and months, I don't want a week of parliamentary session to go by without one of us asking a question about this funding. We know it's there, we know it's been put aside. What are they spending it on if they're not spending it on women and babies? So we want our share of it, and it's our right. It's not a favour, it's our right. Why should 300,000 women with epilepsy have to worry about their babies? They ought to be able to start a family in the secure knowledge that they are facing no more difficulties than anyone else. So really, really grateful to you for coming today, and I hope that we can count on your support in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claire. Thank you to everybody for coming along. I think it's been really, really productive morning. We'll be sure to follow up with all attendees, including MPs, with next steps. And really thank you for your support. And of course, thank you particularly to Yasmin and to Lauren for coming along and sharing your personal stories, which was really, really powerful. So thank you very much, and thank you for your time. I think we will probably leave that for the time being, Yasmin, I guess, unless people what do you think?
We could do that via email, I think, because we've run out of time.
I think we are a bit short on time, but we'll do that via email. But we thank you so much for attending, and we'll be in touch shortly. So thank you.